Joining me now is Republican Senator Marco Rubio of Florida, who of course sits on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee as well as the Intelligence Committee. Senator Rubio, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Before I get to sort of general foreign policy issues, I want to ask about this story that may or may not have involved you about two former Colombian presidents going to Mar-a-Lago, having some sort of meeting with President Trump all over the controversial peace deal between the rebel groups FARC and the current elected Colombian government. The questions are about how did these Colombian presidents get this meeting with the president, who set it up. Miami Herald said you were involved in setting it up. I know you have since denied it. Did you have any role whatsoever in forging a communication between these former presidents and the Trump administration?
No. No. I mean, you'll have to ask the White House whether there even was a meeting or what happened, and you'll have to ask the former presidents. By the way, former President Uribe is now a sitting senator in Colombia, and I'm a sitting senator in the United States. I've met with foreign heads of state in my travel abroad, so I'm not sure what the big deal is in that regard. But that said, you'll have to ask them. I didn't even know they were in Florida. Is
it something you think that the U.S. government should play a role in deciding whether this deal is approved or not in Colombia?
No, I mean, that belongs to the Colombian people. They had a vote in Colombia. They voted it down. The people did. And then the president came back and got it through the Congress. And they have elections in that country, and those leaders are accountable to their people there. So that's not our issue. Our issue is what part of it are we being asked to pay for? And I do have concerns about us, American funds winding up in the hands of FARC or former FARC officials. I do have concerns about FARC officials becoming members of Congress over there because they're now guaranteed X number of seats. And now these criminals and these thugs and these narco-terrorists are traveling to the United States on diplomatic visas. So those are the things I care about. But ultimately, our relationship with Colombia is a very important one that I strongly and will continue to strongly support. It's a democracy. And ultimately, their leaders make decisions. That's an internal matter for them.
All right, I want to move on here. I want to curious, your colleague, Democratic colleague on the Intelligence Committee, Mark Warner, said this earlier this week of Trump's foreign policy. In Beijing, Moscow, Tehran, they are celebrating their strategies. You can't deny it because they don't have any idea of how Trump will respond. That might be great in the short term, but it's not really a long-term strategy for asserting leadership in a world desperate for American leadership. Do you find anything to disagree with Senator Warner on that?
Well, I disagree in the sense that I guess from that statement it implies there isn't going to be a long-term strategy. And I know that there is, and they're working on it, and they have great people working on it. The National Security Council is going back to its appropriate role, which is like an internal think tank that designs big strategic objectives. Just Friday alone, I had a conversation with folks over at the National Security Council about the Western Hemisphere and their strategy towards it. So we've had a lot of debates in American politics over the last few years about tactics. I think what's important to understand is you have to have a strategy, and then the tactics should be driven by the strategy. And I know they're working through it, and I do not anticipate that a year from now you're going to be able to say the same thing. And if we are, then that'll be obviously opportune for criticism. But I don't think that's what we're going to be.
On this reversals on whether it's NATO, the issue of currency manipulation, the decision to strike Syria, these reversals are, in some ways, probably comforting to you on the specifics. But how do you know he won't reverse himself again? Do you just take more comfort in the fact that he's coming to the sort of status quo, or are you concerned he could flip again?
Well, here's what I take, and I said this during the campaign. I think when you're running for president, especially someone that's never held elective office, there's one set of things that you may view the world through, the lens that you may view the world through. Then you get elected, and you get good people, and those good people bring you the facts, and they bring you, here's what's going on, here are our options, here's what happens if you do this, here's what happens when you do that. And that reality begins to assert itself, and you have to react to that. You're now the president. You're no longer a candidate. You're not a pundit. You have to actually make decisions that have real impact and consequence. And I think that's what you're seeing here.
You think he's moving away? You think he's moving away from maybe the isolationist rhetoric and tendencies that he had as a candidate?
I think he's dealing with the reality of being president of the United States. I think he's dealing with the reality of our options oftentimes in foreign policy are not a choice between a good one and a bad one. It's a choice between two less than ideal options, and you're trying to figure out which is the least harmful of the two. And I think that's something we should be encouraged by, not something that we should be critical of. This whole flip-flop thing is a political thing. It's something people use in campaigns. But in every other aspect of our life, people change their minds or make different decisions when presented with a set of facts that perhaps are different from what they thought. Why should that not be the case, especially for something as important as the presidency?
Does that mean you'll never run a flip-flop ad against an opponent ever again? If you think it's an
Excuse me, I
unfair...
didn't hear a flip-flop ad?
Yeah, I'm half teasing, but you're saying you'll never use flip-flopping to attack an opponent again? Oh,
it depends who the opponent is, right?
Fair enough. Let me ask you about the French elections. It appears that both President Trump and former President Obama have expressed a preference, unofficially, if you will. You talked about, look, you're a senator, you meet with foreign leaders, you certainly have an opinion on what's happening in Colombia. Is there a point, though, that goes too far?
Well, I haven't heard the president express a preference. I think what I heard the president express was his belief that the terrorist attacks may help a particular candidate. Ultimately, bottom line is the people of France are going to decide it, and I doubt very seriously whether my opinion or the president's opinion or the former president's opinion is going to have an influence over how they vote. And there's going to be a runoff. And there's going to be a runoff between two candidates, it looks like, with very different points of view. And then the French people are going to make a decision, and we'll need to react to that one way or the other in terms of how it impacts our relationship with them. But I'm not sure that the views of an American policymaker are going to have much sway over a French election.
You're the chairman of the Intelligence Committee. Republican Senator Richard Burr said there's a lot of evidence that the Russians are playing a role in the French election in the same way they did in the U.S. election. Are you investigating that as well in the Intelligence Committee, sort of this overall role that the Russians are trying to do in Western democracies beyond the United States?
Well, I think there's plenty of open source reporting to reach that conclusion, and the French will tell you that. I was in France about 2 months ago, and they openly said these guys, they're involved particularly in undermining Macron, who's one of the kind of the independent candidate that's running there. And they're trying to prop up Le Pen, and that, of course, is open source as well. She's taken out massive loans in order to fund her campaign and her political operations. As far as the general behavior of the Russians, sure, that's something that we're focused on in both foreign relations and also in the Intelligence Committee on an ongoing basis, though. That's not new. That's always. But let me just say that I don't think I've had ever any doubt that these active measures have existed for a long period of time. I think they've just been weaponized to a greater extent over the last 2 to 3 years because of the ability to use the internet and social media and fake news outlets and all sorts of things. And so that is most certainly, you saw that in the open hearing of the Intelligence Committee, but right, quite frankly, multiple committees are looking at that stuff.
All right, Senator Marco Rubio, would love to have gotten to more, but time is of the essence. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your views, sir.
Thanks.